Good morning, everyone. Welcome to IISc book release event. The book to be launched today is titled Research Methodology for Natural Sciences, authored by Professor Soumitro Banerjee. To initiate the event, may I request Professor Amrish Chakravarti, Chair, IISc, to deliver the welcome address.
Thank you, Dr. Vitasta. So first of all, a very warm welcome to everyone to this meeting where, I mean, we do everything that we do at IISc is eventually to actually for these dates on which we release the books. So my hearty congratulations first to the author. Research methodology is an essential area that defines science, and distinguishes it from what is not science. And a book in that area is something that is certainly a welcome addition to the repertoire of books that are available. So we are very pleased and honored that you have published with us. And as far as IISc Press is concerned, I would give a brief introduction. IISc Press was established in 2008, and the mandate was very simple. We wanted to have published quality books at affordable prices so as to help Indian and increasingly international postgraduate education in science and engineering. And this was launched in the centenary year of the Indian Institute of Science. And we have been steadily publishing, and there are many, we have also a number of collaborations. We have co-publishing agreement with Cambridge University Press and also with the World Scientific Publishing Company. And as a result, we have books that are published solely by us, books that are published in collaboration with each of those as well. We have a number of series, IISc Centenary series, which is co-published by World Scientific, IISc Research Monograph series, again World Scientific, IISc Lecture Note series, also World Scientific, and IISc Popular Science series and other books with Cambridge University Press. So the idea is that everyone who is interested in publishing a book in India in these areas, we would like to be their publisher. And we just to give a few examples, the IISc Centenary series, we have Trends in Chemistry of Materials by Professor C.N.R. Rao, the Foundations of Digital Wireless World by Andrew J. Viterbi, then Professor Swaminathan, and so on. And similarly in other areas. So once again, I would like to take this opportunity to invite my colleagues at IISc as well as elsewhere to consider writing books and publishing books and publishing with us, either co-published or solely with us. Just to say that, this is something Professor Anurag Kumar, who was the first chair of the IISc Press Committee, said quite aptly that we all need books in order to study our subjects, and therefore there must be also an interest, especially among our colleagues, in publishing books with which that can be done. So that's my submission to all of you. And once again, many congratulations to Professor Soumitro Banerjee for this wonderful book. And I look forward to, with great interest, listening to it further. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Professor Chakravarti. May I now request Professor Gautam Menon, Professor of Physics and Biology, Ashoka University, Sonipat, to say a few words about the author and about the book.
Thank you, Dr. Das. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to be introducing the book and the author. The book is Research Methodology for the Natural Sciences and published by IISc Press, which is also doing the very good and very important job of having textbooks written by Indian authors available that represent the work that has already been done in India. We don't write enough high quality textbooks in the country. This is somewhere where we've fallen behind many countries in the West. I'm very happy to see that, and happy to see that this is the motivating philosophy behind the IISc Press. I've known Professor Banerjee for some years. We've met in meetings, although I've been following his work. But it was particularly a pleasure to find out a little more about his academic trajectory in the process of preparing for this presentation to all of you. So I'll tell you a little bit about him. I'll go over what the book does and why it's important in our context. One reason why it's important is that the UGC has made a course on research methodology a mandatory part of the PhD program. And as someone who's taught in various institutions and had this mandate sort of presented to us, we've always wondered about what exactly to teach in that, and that's usually been left to the individual who's teaching it, their particular combination of whether they wanted to emphasize the ethics of publication or the mechanics of library use or computer use, etc. So it's never been the case that we've had a textbook to refer to. A few people may still prefer to construct their own course out of this, but many people really would look to having one textbook that combines all of the information together that would be useful for a student, that they would, for a group of students they would like to teach. So that's a particular niche that this book fills. And now to get to the author of the book, Professor Banerjee, he had, as he points out, a somewhat unconventional academic life. He began as an engineer and then later turned into a physicist. He did a BE from the Bengal Engineering College in 1981, an MTech from IIT Delhi, and later a PhD from the same institute in 1987. And then he was at IIT Kharagpur for many years, for 23 years, all the time between 1986 to 2009, really looking at dynamical phenomena in power electronic circuits. That's where he made a very specific and important advance in understanding a type of bifurcation phenomenon that occurs in these circuits. He developed a theory that describes these, a mathematical theory, calling them border collision bifurcations. This was something that turned out to be very crucial to the field at that time. It was widely cited. And of course, he was also recognized for these contributions very soon and very comprehensively. He was awarded the Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar Prize in 2003, recognized as a highly cited author by Thomson Reuters, and elected to the fellowships of various academies of science, including multiple Indian academies of science, the Indian Academy of Science, the INAE, the INSA, the World Academy of Sciences, and the IEEE. He also published 3 books, and so you can see that he is an author who, this isn't his first book, it comes at the end of a fair amount of experience in publishing textbooks that are useful, that have been used by students across the country. And the present book of his is the 4th book. So in the period, as he describes his scientific growth, he started off as an engineer looking at problems specific to power engineering, and then moved into nonlinear dynamics as studied really by physicists and a broader sense in which he was thinking about these problems. So part of the switch to thinking more about physics and a little bit less about electrical engineering was also a move in institutions. He moved from Kharagpur to the IISr in Kolkata in 2009 as a full professor in physics, and of course had to change from teaching courses from electrical engineering departments to teaching courses in physics departments, and had to retool again various types of his own repertoire of teaching in order to be able to teach students of physics. In addition, in 2018, he was asked to teach this particular course on which the book is based, research methodology, which is of course a compulsory subject for all PhD students and an elective subject, as it turns out, for BSMS students. There were a few textbooks available, but he really wanted to construct a book that would represent examples in the way that he taught them, combined ideas in the way that he wanted to teach them. And in particular, I should also point out that he's very concerned about the social aspects of science, particularly about questions of scientific ethics. And these are what figure in this textbook very prominently in terms of the examples, in terms of the lessons that he's been wanting to teach these students. So there is a very personal element. It's not just a product of multiple other approaches to this, but a very personal approach to what he considers to be important, what he considers to be central to the particular field. So he made his own class notes and slowly developed them into the book that is here. The book has 3 major parts, so let me get to describing what the book is, and I will describe some of the chapters in this book very briefly, so that I stay within my time. So the first part of the book really deals with philosophical issues in science. What is science? What is thinking about science actually involved? What is the scientific method? And that's where he strays away from deep philosophical questions about these, but looks at it in a somewhat more practical manner. What do practical scientists do when thinking about scientific method? What are the questions that they confront? What is it that they do when trying to understand scientifically a particular phenomenon? He's looked at only those aspects that are required to understand scientific methodology. But the second part of the book has to relate with how research is actually done. And this is where you look at questions of how do you test a hypothesis, how do you make a measurement, how do you understand errors in measurement, what is the role of theory, what is the role of estimation. The third part of the book concerns ethical conduct and the dissemination of scientific results. Very important in this country because as it is, there is sort of unfortunate reports of plagiarism, of copying, of fake data, etc. So it's important to be able to teach students right in the beginning what constitutes ethical conduct in science, what is allowed and what is not allowed. And of course, we come from a situation where many students that we have in our PhD programs are not native speakers of English, but they're forced to write papers in English. And therefore, there is always the temptation in many of those cases to cut and paste from a Wikipedia or another source with the idea that this isn't very important. It's just a way you put words together, and my words are as good as your words. But this is taken very seriously in the scientific community, as indeed even self-plagiarism of reproducing what you have written earlier in a paper, in a later paper of yours. And these issues are covered, Professor Banerjee covers these issues in some detail and very well. So to look at the chapters, the philosophical foundations of science, there's a chapter that discusses logical reasoning, inductive logic, probabilistic inductive logic, and deductive logic, and points out where logic can be used and misused. Then he discusses the role of philosophy, materialism, the role of the Renaissance, and the advent of the scientific method in his discussion, and then talks about positivism. So that's the first part of this book. Then he goes on to the part of how research is actually done. And there the question is, what do scientists actually do? How do you formulate a scientific question? How do you take a hypothesis? How do you propose a hypothesis, and how do you test a hypothesis? How do you measure things? What does the measurement mean? And what does the relationship between quantities actually mean? And then what are the essential requirements of science? How do you falsify? How do you construct science and scientific theories that in principle have the seeds of their own destruction within them, because we want to be able to, we don't want to write down theories that can never really be tested, because then it can be proved to be either true or false. So falsifiability as a criterion for thinking about scientific research is one way, important way in which we think about this, and he explains all of these questions in his basin. Then he discusses the whole question of hypothesis formulation is less important in the physics and engineering sciences, but very important in the biological sciences, where essentially you're required to state your hypothesis up front, and then the rest of your paper is devoted to describing the various tests of that hypothesis and showing why the data that you gather is consistent with that hypothesis within the limits of statistics. So what is the nature of the hypothesis, the fact that a hypothesis should have predictions that follow from it that aren't as a consequence of the assumptions that you've made, but are potentially testable. This is important. Then he goes on to the analysis of data itself. How do you plot data? How do you look at errors in the data? What is the importance of the normal distribution? What is the sampling error that comes in? What happens when your numbers of measurements are small? And then how do you show and display data? The famous box and whisker plot that is used in many times. What does it actually mean? These are things that I teach too. So I appreciate the discussion that is over here regarding how data is to be displayed and understood when you try to compress just a large amounts of data into something that is simple and compact and takes 4 or 5 different numbers to fully specify. He has a section that is useful on the propagation of errors and a larger section on hypothesis testing and the different types of bias that enters this. Confirmation bias, where you're basically trying to already just confirm a hypothesis that you already have. He describes various statistical tests, the z-test, the t-test, the chi-square test, all of which are practical approaches looking at the statistical uses of data and the statistical ways of testing a hypothesis. And finally, he gets out to the methods of theoretical research and describes something that is close to his own heart, which is the mathematical modeling of physical systems. He uses a nice example, the Lotka-Volterra example over here, as an example of how you have a particular physical or experimental or biological situation which you want to model, and then you can use the framework of mathematics to abstract from that a certain simplified description that has its own consequences. So the interplay between data, experiment, and theory is what figures somewhat prominently over there. The last part of the book is issues in the ethics and dissemination of science. It's not enough to do science, it's not enough to understand how science is done, but it's important to understand how to present the results of your science once it's complete. And that goes into the question of how do you prepare a paper, how do you prepare a research proposal, how do you make a presentation, how do you give a talk, how do you make a poster. All of these things are things that we students learn by hard experience or by talking to senior students under normal circumstances. But here is a place where it's all written down somewhat formally so the students can go and refer to them at the point where they actually need to understand. So he describes the structure of a paper, the middle part, the figures, the conclusions, the acknowledgements, etc. He has a section, he has a chapter that describes presentations. How do you give a good talk? How do you restrict to one important point per slide? Don't crowd your talk with too much information. All of this is stuff that we learn often by experience. Some of us don't learn at all in practice, and we have to suffer through the talks of people who have not learned this in practice. So it's good to understand these questions, and it's a nice simplified summary of all of the important points that a student could keep in mind. He talks about how to write a proposal to a funding agency, etc. Finally, finishes up with questions of ethical conduct, interdisciplinary and collaborative research, environmental safety, and cases of scientific misconduct. And all of these are useful in general in thinking about the landscape of science in a broader social context, which I think is also particularly important. And I think it's his own perspective, his membership as a member of the breakthrough science groups, as well as his involvement in issues of scientific ethics that reflect in these particular chapters. Now, as a scientist and a reviewer, I cannot resist the temptation to also review, in a sense, say that what I think ought to have been there, what I think should have been, he's done particularly well. I thought the section about ethics was particularly nice. I thought the instruction to use active voice and active verbs when you write is also very useful. Students sort of miss and they write very boring sentences because they haven't understood how to make it interesting. So the question of how to make a paper interesting and easier to read is again a point that he stresses, and I think he does that very correctly. What's missing in the book? I'd like to have seen a slightly sort of in discussion of Bayesian probability, because that really is the way we do think about probabilities there, and that's important, particularly now. How do you think about the results of a test for COVID-19? Something that happened. Bayesian methods now form the bedrock of many practical ways of thinking about science. I would have liked to have seen a few more examples of good writing, for example, little boxes that showed here's a well-written poster, here's a well-written. These are the examples that you should take away from that. And in general, examples of good science communication in the form of case studies in little boxes would have been useful rather than a traditional textbook format. These are minor cribs and complaints. Overall, the book is great fun to read. It's an important addition to what we have. It fills a slot that we didn't have earlier, an ability to use a textbook to teach research methodology from. I hope there will be further editions of the book. I enjoyed reading it, and I want to thank the author and thank all of you for this. Thank the IISc for publishing it, and thank Soumitro for writing it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Menon. May I now invite the author of the book to be launched today, Professor Soumitro Banerjee, to deliver the author's remark.
Yeah, I have to thank Professor Menon first, not only for reviewing the book, but also for offering some constructive criticism, which I should definitely keep in mind if at all a second edition comes out ever. The reason that I thought about writing this book is that we get PhD students who come through our education system, the school and college and university education system. And I find that in the whole education system, they have been told what science has found, but they have never been told how science has found it. So entire methodology of science is practically missing in the whole school and college education system. Even to the extent that if you go through the school and college textbooks, you'll never find it ever uttered, don't believe anything without evidence. An elementary thing of science, but the students never learn it. So as a result, when students come to do PhD, they basically so far have learned things that are there in textbooks, have internalized them in some way or other, and have carved them up in the exam sheets. That's it. So it was very important for them to understand that this is not how science is done. Research is a completely different ball game, and therefore there is a methodology to it. So there was, I felt, a urgent necessity to tell them there is a method of science, method of scientific research. Now, but I had to place emphasis in different places, and every teacher has his or her own points of emphasis. There are other textbooks on the subject. It's not that there's none. There are, and as you can easily understand, every teacher has their own specific points of stress. Some books are entirely devoted to statistics, and so on and so forth. But I felt that a student who is going into research must know the basic philosophy of science. That means there are issues like subjective versus objective. When we plan an experiment, design an experiment, we do that with certain objective in mind, and that is essentially to take away or to eliminate all possibilities of subjective bias and to make it as objective as possible. So that is a philosophical position of science, and the students should understand that. That's why I decided to introduce the philosophical aspects upfront, that there is something called subjective thinking, there's something called objective thinking, there's something called materialism, there's something called idealism, and science bases itself on materialism. There is something called causality, and whenever you try to find the cause of something, you definitely look at the material processes and phenomena. You don't say that it happened because of some supernatural reasons. So these are certain methodology of science, and as Professor Menon just mentioned, we propose hypotheses and we test hypotheses. But all hypotheses are not scientific. In order for them to be called scientific, they have to meet certain criteria. For example, falsifiability and all that. So these are the issues that the students should understand. And these are not different from discipline to discipline. This is a unifying theme that runs through all science, even social sciences. So the students should understand that. Now, Professor Menon has already outlined the content of the book, so I'll not go through that again. But I feel that irrespective of the discipline of the students, a particular student, he or she has to understand the whole methodology of science. A student of, say, astrophysics should also understand how the medical scientists are trying to find a cure to COVID, for example. So the methodology everybody should understand, so that if a report comes out in the paper which is done in an unscientific way, the report should itself, the student should be able to say by reading the report that no, it's not how science is done. So the overall understanding of science is something I had in mind while writing the book. And yes, I had to go through various technical details also, but effectively my objective was to give the student a clear idea about how science works. So that's all I have to say from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Banerjee. Now we come to the most important part of today's event. May I request Professor Navakanta Bhat to formally release the book, Research Methodology for Natural Sciences, and say a few words.
Thank you, Bitasta. It's indeed an honor for me. I was just telling Amaresh and Kaushal that Professor Soumitro that we were on the EECS DST pack, and it's a nice occasion to see you, although virtually again. So it's indeed an honor for me. Let me first do this.
So if I may say one word here, the cover of this book. Yeah, so Navakanta, I was just saying that the cover of the book is actually reusable cover. So we are using the same cover, right? So several times.
I have made sure that it is not torn, so you can reuse it. So here it is, wonderfully planned and printed book. It's a must read for every student who is in science. Whether the student does PhD or not. I think this is an extremely important book to read, and I congratulate the author as well as the IIScPress, Amaresh, Kaushal, Bitasta, and all colleagues in the institute, IIScPress, who have made this possible. Professor Gautam Menon has already given an excellent overview of what is out there in the book. But I'll just take a couple of minutes, as Professor Soumitro says in his final message in the book, science is not just a subject of study, right? He says it's way of thinking, right? So that's very deep. And also, he makes a reference to scientific temper, which is there in the Constitution of India. You see, I think one of the very important thing, I had a chance to browse through the book, and there's some bit of discussion that Soumitro spends on, is there a universal truth? And that's very nicely portrayed, actually. The scientists have to be open-minded, right? Oftentimes, we also see a tragedy that scientists get dogmatic, right? And they tend to say that, whatever they believe is the ultimate truth, not being open for debate and discussion, right? So I sincerely hope that, if this book is made a mandatory book for every student in science to sort of get them oriented, hopefully, through this reading, they will come up with, an open mind and thereby become better scientists, not just in their subjects, but also, as Soumitro says, it's way of thinking, right? It's very important in our day-to-day life on every aspect, that every business that we do as human beings, right? The objective thinking and being open for discussion and debate, right? So I think this book really elaborates every bit of that. So again, I congratulate Soumitro for bringing out this excellent book, going beyond UGC's mandatory requirement. I sincerely hope that this book is, followed, even if somebody is not taking that course. Of course, it's an excellent textbook, but beyond that, this should be a must read for everybody. So thank you again for this honor. Yeah, let me close with this.
And now we come towards the end of today's event. May I request Professor Kaushal Verma, Chair, the Office of Communications, IISc, to give the final vote of thanks.
I would like to first begin by thanking the author, Professor Soumitro Banerjee, for considering IIScPress as a platform for this very important book. By doing so, sir, you have reposed a lot of trust in the IIScPress in bringing this project to its logical conclusion. And on behalf of the committee members, I would like to thank you for this trust. I would also like to thank Professor Gautam Menon for sharing his insights into the book and telling us and the audience here what the book contains in brief. I think that's going to be very useful for potential buyers who are there in the meeting today. Next, I'd like to thank Professor Navakanta Bhat for making time out despite his busy schedule to be here with us today. Thank you very much, Navakanta. It's wonderful to have you today. I would also like to thank the IIScPress committee chaired by Amaresh and my wonderful colleagues Prabal, Diptiman, and Arun. I think it's a lot of fun working with all of you. And every book launch is very, very special because you get to meet each other. Of course, I look forward to having these book launches in person. I think they're a lot more fun, a lot more meaningful, but I think we are doing the best that we can at this moment. The IIScPress may be a very young endeavor. As Amaresh told us, we are about 14, 15 years old. But let me assure everyone that when it comes to enthusiasm and our vision to publishing quality books, I think we can give all the established players a run for their money. I'm very, very optimistic that this is a platform that's going to be very, very relevant in the future. So thank you to all. Publishing a book, actually, if you think about the process, it's a very long process. And every step of it is actually backbreaking work. I'm very happy and very fortunate that IIScPress has a very young, a very enthusiastic, and a very hardworking team. So a big thank you to the Office of Communications team here. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank our designers, our editing team, and the printers, all of whom we rely on to complete our project on time. So a big thank you to everyone. And Soumitro, before I sign off, we'll be very happy to have another proposal from you on a different topic. So I look forward to that day. So thank you very much. And last but not the least, thanks to all the participants for being here with us. A big thank you.
With this, we come to the end of today's event. Thank you everyone for joining, and hopefully we'll have the next book release in person. See you all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Hi, hi, Gautam.
Hi, everyone.
See you after a long time.
Yes, very long time. Take care, everybody.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.